Hey everybody, PJ back with Exotic Car Hacks, and today we are going to be talking about depreciation curves, something that perhaps we haven't spent a lot of time on, and partially because I kind of sell this information in my course Exotic Car Hacks, and I'm not really excited about sharing a lot of it for free, but today on YouTube, just because we're trying to be, nice, because apparently I'm not a nice person, I'm going to give you some kind of extra tips and understanding of what's happening in the market today and how depreciation curves have been impacted by basically what's happening. So I wanted to share all that today and more. So let's kind of get into the discussion as a whole. So, when we look at, I'm going to do a bunch of graphs basically, and this being your regular depreciation graphs, and I just want to kind of show you the difference between kind of normal graphs and so on and so forth. So when we talk about basically new car depreciation when it comes to exotic cars, we've always seen the curve kind of come down, and then it kind of holds for quite a few years, and then over time kind of slowly goes back up, right? This is a conventional exotic car, something as similar as a Gallardo, right? So this is like a basic Gallardo, how it kind of goes up and down, right? Now, in the unfamiliar terms of what we call, a COVID instance or a pandemic instance, what occurs is all of a sudden this curve that typically takes its place like that, well, it's accelerated. So let's say the pandemic happened right here. What would occur is that basically we would go right here, and because of the high demand and low supply, what would occur is that this curve would start to trend faster in this regard and basically kind of hold this way. Now, the reason this is important to understand is that there's two key categories. The first one is that right here, we just basically got rid of this, right? This was the previous curve. So we got rid of it, and basically, you see the previous curves would have also caught up here, right? Except you see what would have happened is it would have taken much longer, like another 5-6 years, to basically do what this did in less than like a year. So when we talk about pandemic affecting exotic cars that are older, that aren't necessarily impacted by that, what we're talking about is an accelerated and changed depreciation curve. Now, what I want you to see is this is a typical car, right? Then when we look at these hacks, we're looking at basically like 5 years right here. So usually we'll look for cars that are 3 to 4 years old, and I teach you in the course how to identify which ones actually qualify for that. But then we try to drive them during this era, right? Which is the whole idea of driving them, adding mileage and losing nothing. But in the case that this occurs much faster, a lot of people during this era basically within just 1 to 2 years made a lot of money. This is the last people that were holding exotic cars, because you see, typically you wouldn't hold that for that long because it would be boring. You'd want to get out of a car. So instead of having a 6-7 year hold, within just a 2-year period, you were able to basically recoup a lot of the original depreciation that the car took because of that accelerated thing. This is why exotic cars are hackable, and they're a lot better than a typical depreciation car. Like this is a normal Civic that would start here, plummet, and just keep kind of going down to its death. Now, partially the reason why a normal car depreciates is because newer cars are introduced, meaning like what ends up happening is a newer car, a newer version of the car is introduced that follows the same depreciation curve to its death. But as you introduce new models, like the Civic keeps getting better and better and better, then the value stays at a higher thing because of the cost of dollar. But what occurs is, since the MSRP is higher on the car, it always kind of keeps the other car from being worth more. Because you basically have to use this very simplistic logic. Why would someone purchase a 2022 at the same price as a 2021 if they could easily go into any single dealership and buy the 21, right? Or that 22. It wouldn't make sense for them to invest more money in the 21. Well, what's happening now, even in normal cars, is that, well, since you can't get a 22, then the 21 is basically being worth more used, because you would have to wait 6 months to get your 22, and typically most people aren't used to that, like the American way, right? Now, if we look at the depreciation curve, for example, of a collectible exotic, this is like an LP640 or an SLS. These cars are out of production. There's no more supply coming in. And the typical curve, you see, would have been like this and then floated back. We'll use this for the SLS Mercedes, one of its kind, meaning it's a gull wing. This is not the AMG GT. It started in the mid-2s. It kind of dropped to the 1s and then kind of started taking its place. Now, because of COVID, what happened is right here, it just started going like this, and started pushing past itself. Again, what we're beating here is the time frame. We're not really changing what would have happened. We're just accelerating the time frame. So this happens, and this is something important to understand, that when people say, well, people got lucky, they bought cars, it just went up. Cars like the SLS, for example, or the LP640, or cars that are out of production, basically, we're going to go up anyways. So it's not a question of, like, these guys got lucky. They were just holding the right asset at a moment where that accelerated appreciation took its place way ahead of schedule, creating more of a V shape rather than a U shape. But let's come back here for the new cars for a second. We're just going to use this for new cars. And you kind of have to understand why certain things happen, and why I'm kind of aware when I tell people, if you follow me on Instagram, I create millionaires or exotic car hacks, you kind of start to understand depreciation curves on newer cars and what occurs. So we said the reason, if this was, for example, a 20, this is a 21, this is a 22, right? So one of the reasons why, again, we said the 22 was going to push the other one back is typically because it's a newer, better product. But the 21 would only go up beyond the 22 or at the same price, or not drop back, as long as the 22 wasn't available. So let's use a G63 for an example. So you go in the dealership, and you basically buy a G63 that's 180K MSRP, and you pay for that car roughly about, right now it's 100 over, or like even more than that. Let's say 290K is a good deal on a brand new, like this is 23 now because they didn't really make a 22. So G63 goes 180 to 290. That's good. So now you're paying about 100 to 110 over sticker, right? In your head, that might sound completely crazy because you might think to yourself, well, that's a lot of money over sticker. But you have to start thinking about it a little bit different. So first off, there is some good to this in the sense that it's still one of the best SUVs under 300. Now, when you look at the Urus, a competing SUV, the Cullinan, some of these other trucks, you're talking about a much higher price point. So even though it is overpriced compared to what it should be priced at, based on the idea of inflation and everything we're undergoing, the 290 is still value in the category, which is what keeps the G63 high and why they're not really dropping past 250. So that's something to understand. Now let's use this depreciation example here that we used previously, as this is just this other chart. So when you have the 19s and the 20s, they're basically supposed to go down. But what happened with COVID is they caught up and they started going up, right? Now, when you have the new ones start to get introduced to market, theoretically, you would have this push, right? Like we just saw here and we talked about. But here's what dealers have been doing. So dealers for brand new ones have been marking up, even on orders, 100K over. So technically, the new one starts here, right? Which is significantly higher. And now it's trying to drop because of depreciation. But then look at what happens. It kind of holds and it keeps going. And then what happened is right here, which was the next one is supposed to come, the 22, well, it was out of production. They didn't bring a 22. So the reason I said is because now that you don't have a 22 anymore, I want you to understand how this works. So you're here, you have this basically small thing that goes whoop, you know, it's now super word, right? But the new one doesn't get introduced till here. So the new one doesn't really drop. It kind of stays like this because there's nothing on top that's going to push it down. So while it starts coming down, it starts to come down like this based on the fact that it's just going to get older and miles are going to be impacted. And at some point, you see these are going to start merging. So when that merge pattern comes, and I want you to understand this because I want you to see what happens. When that merge happens right here, right, what occurs is this starts to trend back down to follow it at a rate that is basically almost identical to that one. So the gap here is here. It's in the new cost. And the biggest gap is here in the depreciation cost. So here's what happens, though. This is where I said these cars are risk. This huge 100K gap here that dealers introduce on the MSRP to kind of get their share of the pie, right? The reason this car is incredibly dangerous in context to other exotic cars or like a new Urus at 150 over, etc., is that it's still in production. And even though you might argue, well, it might be the last gas power, it might be the last thing, it doesn't really matter, though. Like it's like a Rolls Royce that's going electric. Technically, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. You don't use as much gas. You go faster. You make no noise. That's kind of the point of a Rolls Royce anyways. So it doesn't hurt it that Rolls Royce is going super digital or anything. It actually helps it and it makes the customer want that product. We're not talking about like SVJs and Lamborghinis and stuff. We're talking about luxury cars that really don't have a need for huge noise or anything else. And so the G63, while it might come back, and it's still coming back as a gas-powered car, but let's say it doesn't come back in 2 years, it still doesn't matter. And so where I guess there's a big opportunity here to understand is that right now they're charging that 100K because demand is still very high. So then you take all of the things like Bitcoin crash, market crashes, and things where people aren't making crazy amounts of money. Now, supply is not coming back or getting any better, no problem on that. They're still 6 to 8 months out. But if you take demand down 60 to 70% and you just say, okay, hold on. And you just say, okay, listen, I don't have, this is something I want you to really understand here. You take demand down over 50% and you start to say, I don't have a need, I don't have enough customers to buy these units. Well, the dealer slashes that 100K, right? It was 100. And they slash it and they go, it's 50 over now. And they slash it, they go, it's 10 over now. And then they go, okay, it's 5 over now. So eventually they go, hey, it's 0, right? Okay, it's just MSRP. Well, what happens then is that, you see, this action right here doesn't take place anymore because right away you start all the way back here again. And again, you follow similar depreciation, even if supply is not coming back. But what that means is that these numbers that were really high are now significantly accelerated because you see they introduced a 23 model here lower than a 22 because of demand decreases. So where the difference is the uncertainty of this 100 to 0 comes from dealerships and comes from scam artists that basically are marking up orders that are pre-ordered and pre-promised to customers, but they're still marking them up. When that practice goes away, you instantly lose 100K in value, even if your depreciation curve has taken its place. The difference between a conventional model that's accelerated and might even continue to come down or anything else is that it isn't instant and it gives you time to react. So if you're buying one of these crazy overinflated cars that is still in production, has a future production year, and you're still putting your money in it, then you are misunderstanding this very basic concept that it's not a question of, oh, when will it drop? How come I'll lose 100K or anything? It's about the fact that the 100K loss or the 120K, 130K loss is not in your hands or the market's hands. It's in the dealer's hands, people who have given no shit about overselling to people and then cutting contracts. How will they not drop that price to make their sales? They will. So what will happen is, even if they don't right now or they do later, that 100K is always in the air as a potential collapse. On the other side, if you do have a collapse on an out-of-production car, nothing is going to stack on top of it. Like an SLS, there is no new SLS. So the trend takes its place and doesn't get forced up and down by any external factors. And the only thing that happens is the market supply, which is never going to increase, is going to start sipping into market very little every time at a higher price index, bringing the cost up, and that's why the appreciation curve versus depreciating. And on a normal car, that would be a Gallardo, again, not a collector item, not an incredibly wanted item, a high production item that is packed again then by the Huracan on top, pushing it down, etc. Different than the LP640, and I'm going to explain why with the V12s, but let's assume here with the Gallardo, with the V10s, very basic here, Gallardo pushed down by Huracans, so there's a progression and there's a lot of units. So because of the constant unit amounts, you're really not getting anything like significantly different. And also, these are very different buyers, Gallardos and LP640s and SLSs. This is a collector type buyer, someone who doesn't use their car all the time. This is Lamborghini's way to attract a younger audience that does switch their cars. And you have to pay attention to that because this is the same argument with the GT4 Cayman. A GT4 Cayman is expected to come in at 100K over like almost a 300K car. It's not that it's not worth it. It's that you have to understand that even having the highest collectible aspect of a Cayman still doesn't change the fact that it's a Cayman. It's no different than coming to me and saying it's the Rolls-Royce of Kias, but it's still a Kia. So who gives a shit? So what I'm saying is at the end of the day, it doesn't follow the same models just because it's really wanted and hard to get. And that's one of the things you have to kind of understand. And also remember, the higher these numbers go, the lower the liquidity index of the investment, meaning the lower the opportunity for you to sell it and get your money back out, for a couple of reasons. As cars get older, they're harder to finance. As cars get older, there are obviously less buyers for them because they're out of warranty and they need care. So all of these things take their place, and this is basically how we end up in making a very conscious decision that there's a risk factor in buying a car 100K over sticker versus buying an older car that, you use the generic hacking methodology that I teach. And if you have no idea what it is, click the link in the description. I'll teach you within 1 hour what car hacking is, completely free. But that's kind of the core of it, right? And so that's what we have to understand, because you have to understand the different models from new cars to basic cars and then to investment cars. So hopefully you like videos like this. Again, this is what the entire Exotic Car Hacks course offers on a day-to-day basis. So make sure you check us out. Click the link in the description and either join us or take the free training, whichever one you want. And of course, like, subscribe, turn on notifications. And don't worry about being nice. Worry about your wallet so you can make yours.